Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here, the host of the Smart Business Revolution podcast. You know, each week I feel so privileged. I get to talk with interesting CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs of all kinds of different companies, from organizations like YPO and EO to companies like Activation Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable, Axe Software, and many more. Most of the co-founder of Rise25, where we help businesses to build life-changing relationships and connect to great referral partners, strategic partners, clients, and more through podcasts and content marketing. And, you know, today we're going to take a dip back into my past because I practiced law for many years. We're going to be talking a lot about that field, but also how it applies to all kinds of different fields, because my guest today is Elise Holtzman. Elise Holtzman is a former practicing attorney, executive coach, and the founder of The Lawyer's Edge, where for the last 12 years, she has worked with law firms to grow thriving businesses, helping lawyers to become better business developers and leaders. And we're going to talk about that idea of business development, not just in the legal field, but in general in all kinds of different business contexts as well. She provides consulting, training, and coaching for her clients. She also speaks frequently for all kinds of different organizations, including state bar associations, the ABA Women Rainmakers, the Leadership Council on Legal Diversity, and the Legal Marketing Association. She also writes articles on the subjects of business development for publications such as the New York Law Journal and Law 360, and also is the host of the Lawyer's Edge podcast, where she and her guests discuss current trends and enduring principles that drive success and happiness in the law. And I feel very privileged to have supported her in creating that podcast. She's doing a great job with it. But first, before we get into that discussion, this podcast, this episode is brought to you by Rise25. And through Rise25, we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. You are listening to a podcast right now, and so you better have a podcast as well. I tell everyone that they should, whether you work with us or not, or someone else, or do it on your own. Some of the best relationships that have ever come to me have come because of the podcast. So I tell everyone all the time they should do it. If you want to learn more, you can go to rise25media.com. All right, Elise, I'm super excited to talk to you about this. Now, you know, you and I both went to law school. You went to a slightly better law school than me, Columbia. You know, so you go into the world of New York law, big law firm. For those of you who don't know, it's crazy cutthroat, long hours. And, you know, clearly, given what you do now, you help other law firms with business development and things like that. Clearly, you must have had to figure it out, right? Like, you know, from a couple of years into that experience, you figured out how to bring in clients, how to do business development. I see you kind of laughing here, but
yeah, I'm totally laughing at you. Nothing could be further from the truth. You know, I started practicing law, and you know, when you get to any law firm, especially a big law firm, they just want you to do the work. They want you to learn how to be a good lawyer, and they want you to grind out the hours because that's how they get paid. And you know, especially in a market like New York, they're paying very high salaries, so they need to get you to be focused on the work on your desk. And nobody ever mentioned business development to me. Nobody talked about it. They don't train on it. They don't mention it in law school. They don't mention much of anything in law school, as you well know. They don't teach you how to, you know, they don't teach you anything about financials of a business. They don't teach you about, you know, managing an organization, hiring and firing people, managing up, managing down, none of that stuff. I mean, as you probably remember, they really don't even teach you to run a case or a deal. So, you know, you get there and you're supposed to kind of apprentice yourself to somebody and several somebodies and learn how to do it. But they don't mention that stuff. You know, they don't teach it in law school and they don't teach it in law firms. Yeah. So no, it never even occurred to me, honestly. It wasn't until I got out of the law and started getting involved in coaching that I realized how powerful, you know, coaching and training could be for lawyers who want to achieve something, but there are no guideposts for them.
Yeah. And why do you think that is in the legal profession in particular? You know, they seem it's become very regimented, where it's the people on the top, the partners that are doing all the business development and the sales, and then the low level people that do all the work or most of the work.
Right. So I think there are a few reasons for it. First of all, the law has always been considered a profession, right? So if you picture, somebody kind of putting their nose in the air and being kind of snooty and a little country club about the whole thing, this is a venerable profession. It's not a business. And that permeates the legal profession. And it's only, in the last couple of decades that people have started realizing that we need to talk about this as a business, right? It's sort of like a new legal economy came along. It wasn't as simple as, you're a lawyer, you're smart, you do a good job, you live in a community where people know you, so they're going to hire you. Law became much more of a business. You've got these mega firms, they're global. Even in a small town, you've got to be able to bring in clients. So there was kind of this snooty academic attitude from the law schools. And then, most people went to law firms and they were lifers, right? They stayed forever. And it's not that way anymore. There's a lot less, there are a lot less people that actually make partner percentage wise. You don't make partner just because you've been there for a long time and you've put in good work and you're loyal to the firm. There's a business component to it in some form, regardless of what, even if you don't have business already, you might have a specialty area or they think you're going to be able to develop business. So I think that it's just tradition, right? Old habits die hard. And so they don't teach that stuff in law school. And, there are some sort of, top law schools that will say things like, well, we don't want to become a trade school. Right, that somehow this selling thing is unseemly and we're all going to turn into the proverbial used car salesman. And then, when you get to a law firm, I mean, in fairness, that's not the business the law firm is in. The law firm is in the business of serving their clients. They're not in the education business. They're not in the training business. And so, there's always been this idea that the cream rises to the top. Well, that's not always the case, particularly when the people that are coming in don't necessarily know what it takes to get where they want to go.
Yeah. Well, I want to dive into this topic of, how you can teach or train or work with clients who come in with this background, the history that you just explained, but then to get them to spend the time and energy and attention that it takes to actually do business development, to build relationships, to get clients in the door. And that's where I think it's kind of a universal experience that listeners will find valuable, even if you're not a lawyer. But you hit kind of a breaking point, right? After the birth of your first child, you had a toddler and you finally said, enough is enough. You were on partner track. You were on track to make a ton of money as a partner, but you also saw the writing on the wall and how many hours you'd have to work. So bring us back to that period and what that experience was like. What was it like did you go back to work with the toddler and kind of were you there for a couple of months and you realized like, this is not working?
Yeah, I think I was there for almost 2 years after she was born. And look, I loved what I did, right? I'm one of these like nerdy people who just like loved the law so much. And there's some definitely unhappy lawyers out there and people who go into different things, but I loved what I did. I did deals, I did commercial real estate transactions. It was just fun. But what happened was when I went back to my firm, I was the most senior associate in the department. So I wasn't old enough to be up for partner, wasn't that senior yet, but I was the most senior associate in the department. So, that time was coming. So I was running a lot of deals on my own. And I went back to work part-time. Now, part-time for a New York City big law lawyer was, and in most cases still is, 40 hours a week. Wow. So, when you hear that, you get a sense of what the expectations are, right? So part-time was 40 hours a week and I was making 80% of my salary. And so I thought, okay, that seems fairly reasonable. I can make that happen. I mean, I think I would have been happier if it was a few less hours a week, but that wasn't what they weren't willing to do anything less than that. So fine, 40 hours a week, 80% of my salary. But because in like most professions, it wasn't a wage, I wasn't making a particular wage. I wasn't clocking in and clocking out. Like you stay until the job gets done. And so I was working many, many more hours. And I happened to marry a lawyer who was doing the same thing at another firm, just in a different field. He was doing litigation and employment work. So it got to the point where it became untenable. The whole thing just became stressful. And, we never saw the baby and we never saw each other. And we were eating at our desks and not exercising and not taking care of ourselves. And I just thought, we were so young. And I just thought, like, is this what it is? Mm. And in many ways, for me, it was what it was because I didn't know, there were no coaches, there were no sponsors, there were some mentors, but there were not a lot of mentors for a woman who wanted to have children and be a partner at that time. So I kind of threw in the towel. I mean, I thought, well, I can't do this anymore, so I'll stop doing it. We'll kind of pull our family back together and make that a little bit more sane. And then I'll figure out what I want to be when I grow up.
And what was it like telling your family, telling your friends, telling your colleagues that you were going to walk away? Because I know that is not an easy decision to make. And the firm wanted you to stay, right?
Yeah, for sure. And so, for me, it felt like a failure. It felt like I hadn't made a choice, right? It felt like the choice was taken away from me. And I say this is really important to note, is that I wound up staying home with kids for a while. We wound up having 2 more kids, and I wound up staying home with them for a while. And I really felt at the time that I didn't have a choice. And yet, at the same time, I'm very well aware that most women do not have the choice from a financial perspective to stay home full time. So I was sort of alternately annoyed at the whole thing and grateful at the same time, right? Because for most women, they didn't have that choice. I did, because my husband was able to support us. But it did feel like a failure, because I had worked so hard to get where I was going, and my parents had invested, so much time, energy, and yes, money. They helped me to the extent they could, to go to great schools and to get the law degree and all of that stuff. And so, it was very hard for me to accept that this was what I was doing.
Yeah. And what point did you start moving towards business development? And also, how do you define the parameters around business development? Because it's kind of an amorphous term for some people.
Yeah, so it's really about sales and marketing, right? It's like lawyers don't like to say the word sell, so we use the word business development instead. And that's where I think this really is applicable to all of your listeners, because it really just is about this idea of getting comfortable with the idea that, you have something valuable to offer. And, while there are people who will say, oh, this thing sells itself, I mean, the fact is we all know nothing sells itself. And so, lawyers have had to come to the conclusion that business development, sales and marketing are important. But again, as you said, traditionally it's been, there are a couple people in the firm that bring in the clients and everybody else does the work. In the law firm, we talk about finders, minders, and grinders, right? So the finders bring in the work, minders take care of the clients, and the grinders are the ones grinding out, the documents and all of that sort of thing, and the more junior people. And as with most businesses, the finders, and I say this all the time, tend to be more equal than everybody else, right? They tend to get paid more because they're the ones bringing in the business. Whether that's the model we should be using or not, that it certainly is the model in the law and in many other professions as well. Yeah. And so when I decided to get back into the workforce, I thought about going back to law because I did love it. But as I said, I had this very black and white vision that, oh, this isn't going to work for me. And I've been home long enough that I don't want somebody else telling me how many hours a week I have to work. I put enough pressure on myself, and I'm a hard worker without somebody else telling me, what time to show up and what time I can go home. Also, the third kid came along with special needs. So I felt like I wanted to be able to, for all 3 of them, be close to home, and we don't have family around here. So I found out about coaching. I found out about executive coaching and leadership coaching, and it really felt like the right fit for me. So I was trained that way. And then it was like, great, you're trained. Now, what are you going to do with it? I almost like have this vision of myself sitting there with my mouth hanging open going, I don't know, all I know is lawyers. Mm-hmm. And so I wound up devoting my practice to lawyers, but definitely did not start out in business development. That was not really on my mind at the time.
What were you doing first?
When I was first doing it, I was talking to people about things like making partner, being intentional about career success, how to manage their careers. For some people, it was things like, delegation and time management, which I still do some work with. But I hadn't really thought so much about the business development piece, again, because it just wasn't part of my experience, right? Nobody had ever really mentioned it to me. What happened was, this is utterly true. I selfishly, I didn't come from an entrepreneurial family. I came from, a dad who was always with a company, and my mom was a speech language pathologist in a school system. So it was like, oh, cool. Now I have my own business. I have no idea how to get clients. I have no idea how to do marketing. So I started like running all over the country, going to conferences and reading books. And I was probably, totally impossible because I was so hyper focused on learning as much as I could. And I realized that I had accidentally started helping my clients grow their own businesses.
How did you accidentally? Were you just like kind of giving them like flipping advice and then
that's exactly what happened. We would be talking and it would like be, well, if you could talk to this person and bring in this client, or, I'd like to bring in this client, but I don't know what to do. So we would talk about things like, networking and how to network and how to talk to people, how to go into it with, a giving nature so that you're adding value for people, and, getting involved in raising your profile, in the business community or the legal community, speaking, writing, all of those sorts of things, because these were all the things that I was learning about. And I found it completely fascinating. So I don't know, one day it was sort of like the light bulb went on, like, hello, you actually know what you're doing. You're growing your business. You're helping other people grow their businesses. This is something that everybody started asking me about. I at one point, I think I had like 7 workshops I had put together that I had listed. I do these 7 different workshops, and 99 times out of 100, they were asking me for the business development content. So that's when I started, whittling away all the stuff that, like with any business, you've got to give people, what they need and want, and what they are buying, what they want you to provide. And so that's how my practice turned into, largely business development. I do some other things as well.
And we talked a bit about kind of some of the psychological barriers that lawyers in particular as an industry have, because they view themselves as a highfalutin profession and don't want to be, I don't know, dragged down to the mud. I don't know if that's the right term for it. But how do you work with people and get them to see the value and the virtue of doing business development? How do you get them to get past that mindset?
Right. So I think as far as the value itself of engaging in sales and marketing, I think people see the value, right? Because they do understand that the people in their firms who are the rainmakers, who are able to bring in the business, are the people that have the power to, call the shots in their own career, make decisions. They're involved in the leadership of the firm. They make the most money. What it then comes down to is sometimes there's a distaste for it, and there's also a lack of confidence. It's like, well, that's great, but I couldn't do that. Right. So there's a mindset shift that has to happen, and people have to kind of look at themselves and figure out what are the obstacles that are getting in your way. So, for every coach, there's so many people out there doing coaching. Some of them are really terrific. And for any coach, you've got to be looking at the obstacles and having the client acknowledge what these obstacles are. Some of them are going to be external obstacles. I don't know how to do this. Right. Or they think it's an external obstacle because they don't have time. And so there are things that they need to learn. They need to understand what the principles of sales and marketing, business development are. They need to be able to work it into their schedules. A lot of it, though, is the internal obstacles. It's like, well, I'm an introvert. I couldn't possibly develop business. Well, that's not true. I don't have time to develop business. Well, the person in your firm who's bringing in $10 million a year of business or whatever it is has the same 24/7 that you do. So, he or she has managed to figure it out. You can figure it out too. There are people who are perfectionists, right? They're worried about how they're going to come across talking to people. They're afraid to be on camera. They don't think they're good writers, right? There are so many things that they're telling themselves. And so what I try to do with people is to help debunk these ideas that they have in their heads and help them get a few wins under their belts so that they can actually see, and they have evidence for, now I do sound like a lawyer, they have evidence for this idea that they can make it happen, right? And they don't have to do it the way somebody else does it. They can do it in a way that makes sense for them.
I love that idea, getting wins. Give me an example of what that looks like. How do you get someone to get an early win?
Yeah. So for some people think that a win, and I this is a myth I also debunk right away. Some people think that a win is I brought in a client. That is not where we start. If that's the only win, we're not going to get a win for a long time. Yeah, it's a really high bar because this is one of those, to use a cliche, this really is a marathon, not a sprint. You're not going to go out there and shake hands with somebody and have one conversation and probably have them as a tremendous client for the rest of your life. It doesn't typically work that way. Or you're not going to write an article and all of a sudden people are banging down your door because they've got to hire you. So it takes time to develop relationships and to have a body of work of, web workshops or articles or whatever. So an early win could be something as simple as setting up a lunch or a coffee or a Zoom call with somebody that you met at a conference last month. It could be as simple as figuring out what your specialty area is. Believe it or not, in the legal profession, as you know, in some places we're not actually allowed to refer to ourselves as specialists or experts, but pick the area that you're going to focus on. Are you a copyright lawyer? Are you an employment lawyer? Are you a hedge fund lawyer? And really narrow that down and make some decisions about, this is the area that I'm going to concentrate in so that I can hang out with people who could be good clients or referral sources for me. It can be something very, very simple. And so you start to see people move in the right direction. And when they're getting these small wins, when they're moving in the right direction, they start to realize that they're capable of doing this, that it's like, again, another cliche. It's like when they look at the whole elephant, it looks completely undoable. They look at the guy in their firm who has, a huge book of business, and they're like, oh my God, I could never do that. Well, we're not talking about you having a huge book of business right now. We're talking about you setting up 3 Zoom, coffees with people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So breaking it into smaller pieces.
I love that. What about, you mentioned a little bit earlier about the objection of not having enough time. I know that's a big objection for people. So what do you say to people who use that as an objection?
So it is probably the most common objection I get, because it's also when people feel uncomfortable with something and they lack confidence and they don't know how to do it, a great go-to is I'm so busy. And in many professions, particularly in big cities and particularly in some of the financial professions, working crazy hours is a badge of honor. So you just get to say, you don't understand how important I am and how busy I am. I just can't fit this in. And so what I say is a couple things. First of all, you find time for doing the things that are most important to you. You find time for, hopefully taking care of your health, taking care of your family, making sure the bills get paid, making sure you feed the kids and the dog. You find ways to fit that stuff into your life. And it might be a little crazy sometimes, but you do it. When you make anything a priority, whether it's going to the gym or business development, you can actually build something into your calendar and keep the appointment with yourself and make it happen. So it could be, sometimes I ask people to just commit between now and the next time I talk to you in a couple of weeks to put 1 hour of business development time into your calendar. It could be 2 half-hour little power hours or little power half hours. The amount that you can get done in 30 minutes or an hour is mind-boggling when you're focused on it. Turn off the phone, close the door, unless somebody is dying, bleeding, or needs to go to the emergency room, as I used to say to my kids, focus on that. And people are usually willing to put something small into their calendar like that. And the other thing I tell people is, look, you got to change your job description, right? You're not just a lawyer anymore, or you're not, if it's outside the legal profession, you're not just a lawyer anymore. You're not just an accountant anymore. You're not just a consultant anymore. You are in the business of marketing your services. That is actually part of your job description. And when you shift the mindset that this is part of your job description, now all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, I have time for that. That's part of my job. Like, that's a really important part of my job.
Yeah. Now, what just in the legal profession, there's a billable hour requirement for most lawyers, right? Many lawyers. And so some firms, they maybe would incentivize that kind of behavior by allowing them to count those hours. Others, maybe not. How much does that play into become a barrier for you?
I think that's huge, right? The legal profession, particularly those who are not doing plaintiff's work, right? Because a lot of that work is contingency based. But the majority of lawyers that I work with are working on a billable hour. And, bonuses are determined by billable hours. Your compensation is determined by billable hours. Whether you're considered partner material or a good associate, is dependent on that stuff. So that's pretty hard to get past. That mindset that it's the be all and the end all is hard to get past. Law firms that allow, they have like a billable number for sales, marketing, and business development for lawyers are incentivizing their people to do it because they're showing that this is something that not only is a good idea, but that we take seriously at this firm and that you're actually going to be rewarded for it. It might be, we'll consider up to 200 hours a year as part of your bonus. You can't be doing business development all the time, every minute. You've got to actually bill hours and serve clients, but they give a certain number of hours that they will take into account when it's bonus time. And I think that law firms can have such an impact on their own bottom line by creating internal cultures that support this sort of thing, rather than waiting until somebody has been practicing law for 10 years and they want to be a partner, or, same thing could be at an accounting firm or consulting firm, saying, hey, yeah, you've been here for a long time, you do good work, we consider you for partner, but where's your business?
So
I'm sorry,
how do they
what?
create? How do they create that culture though? How do you instill that, especially earlier on?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different ways you can do it. I think that, first of all, talking to lawyers about it from the very beginning. I mean, even on interviews, finding out from them, are they willing to do something like this? Is this something that they'd be excited about, particularly if someone taught them how to do it, right? Because most of them aren't going to come in unless they've had sales experience in the past. Giving some training, especially when they're junior, and tell them you are not expected to bring in business. However, we really want you to retain the relationships you have, nurture those relationships, and grow them over time. So get someone to help them understand that don't get so busy working that you forget about all the people you went to law school with. Because the joker you sat next to in law school is going to wind up becoming general counsel of some company. And, if you develop that relationship and retain that relationship over time, he or she may well come to you for the business. So I think at every stage of growth and development, everyone in any profession or entrepreneurship or whatever can learn something about the process of business development. Not put pressure on them, but encourage them and train them and have it be talked about. And again, to your point, building it into the billable hours, and making sure that they get rewarded for effort and not just results.
And let's talk about that. So you mentioned earlier, like building into your schedule 30 minutes or 60 minutes to do business development. If I'm hearing that and I'm, a business owner, whether in the law or not, or not even a business owner. I mean, you could be an attorney of counsel, or it could be, associate or something like that listening to this. What would I do? What would be a good use of my time in that 30 to 60 minutes? What do you tell them to do?
Right. So sometimes you're going to be taking action, and I'll get back to that in a minute. You're going to be emailing people or setting up coffees or going out to lunch or writing an article or, talking to organizations that you might be able to speak for, going to events. Sometimes it's just planning, like sitting down and thinking to yourself, who is my target client, right? Who is my target customer? It could be an entrepreneur with a completely different sort of business. Who is my target client? Who do I want to be calling me and referring, right? Where does my business come from? I mean, I ask people this question, to the extent you have business now, where does it come from? Many times they have no idea. Well, right. And so there are software programs where when you do client intake, you can list where it came from, and you can actually download that into a sheet where you say, well, 60% of my business comes from referrals from other lawyers, or 20% of my business comes from prior customers to whom I sold, cute leashes for my dog, for their dog or whatever, so that you know where it's coming from, and then you know who to focus on. Another thing to do is make a list of your contacts, and actually have it all in one place so you can keep track of who you're connecting with on a regular basis. There may be people who are great sources for you and great people to be connecting with, but you kind of forget about them because you're not keeping it all in one spot. And then maybe making, an A list and a B list. Who are the people that I want to connect with in the next 6 months, and who can I wait on a little bit?
And then, so we're talking about like what you would do if you had 30 minutes or 60 minutes.
Exactly.
And the next question beyond that is, how do you make it a habit? How do you make it a pattern? How do you make sure that this is something that you don't just do once and you keep on doing? Obviously, hire a coach like yourself to hold you accountable.
Right.
But
there's a lot out there about habits, and the best coach in the world probably has some bad habits too. I mean, I'm a perfect example of someone who is sort of serially building up my exercise routine and then forgetting about it for a while. So nobody's perfect, and everybody has something that they wish they could be better at in terms of their habits. First of all, having a coach is great, and I mean, obviously I've got skin in the game here, but having a coach is great. I have my own coach. I have a couple of coaches, actually. John, you're one of them, right? Because you've helped me with the podcast. The fact of the matter is, I would not have gotten the podcast off the ground if you hadn't helped me with it. And it's been one of the best things that I've done for my business. It's still early in the game, but I'm already really doing well with that. I also have generally a coach for my business. who is a complete rock star. One of the reasons that I have other people helping me is because they hold me accountable, not to them, but to myself. Right. So that's what I'm doing with my clients. They're not accountable to me. They're accountable to themselves and to their goals and to the things that they said they wanted to do. Now, if for some reason you don't want to coach, or you're early on in your business and you don't feel that you have the financial ability to find a coach for yourself, you can find somebody else to help you with this. So you can have a friend and create your own little accountability partnership. Right. So you can have a friend who is, maybe in a completely different business or profession, where you meet every couple of weeks on the phone. It could be 15 minutes or a half hour. And you talk about, what have you accomplished that you committed to, and what's gotten in your way? What haven't you accomplished that you still want to accomplish? And how can I be helpful to you in getting that done? What's standing in your way?
That's great. That's great. Yeah. And for many years, actually, I had an accountability partner who I met with every week. We would meet for like 10 minutes, and it was great. Like really good practice. I'd recommend it for a lot of people. Then he went to law school, actually. So
Right.
that's probably why we're not doing it anymore. Well, we're getting a little low on time, and I want to wrap up with two questions that I always ask. And I realized usually with my guests, I warn them beforehand. I forgot to warn you. So special privilege. You get to do it without me having warned you, but I think you'll be okay. So the first question is, I'm a big fan of gratitude. And when you look at your peers or others in your industry, so it could be other people that are coaches, or it could be maybe even CMOs or people in a coaching line of work at a law firm or in the legal industry. Who do you admire? Who do you respect? Who are you grateful for?
In my industry, there are two people that come to mind. They are both former practicing lawyers who also became coaches and consultants. And, some of the work that they do is the same kind of work that I do, and some of them do something slightly different. One of them is John Mitchell, who's known as the Purple Coach, for a long list of reasons. And, he's great. I mean, he and I are very, very different. And so we've been able to kind of call each other out on our garbage. He opened some doors for me, introduced me to some people, got me involved with the Leadership Council on Legal Diversity, which was a wonderful experience for me. I've met so many great people through him. So I adore him. He's terrific. And the other is Carrie Fletcher. So Carrie Fletcher, was also a lawyer. As I said, she worked at Harvard for a long time. She went and, she's just too smart and driven. She went and got a business degree at London Business School, like a strategy degree recently. And we've become very close friends. I met her through LCLD as well. What I love about her is that she's so warm and kind and funny. It's just fun to talk to her. And she also, this is kind of a tough group. We're sort of the Three Musketeers. And so we're pretty tough on each other, but in a loving way. And sometimes you need that, right? You need somebody who will call you out on your garbage and make fun of you, in a loving way, like not to hurt you, but just to be like, yeah, you know what? I know your shtick and I'm not believing any of it. And so I'm really grateful to both of them. We're very supportive of one another. We learn from each other. There's really no competition between us. And I'm grateful for that, because sometimes you just have a dumb question. And particularly when you're in your own business. I mean, this is one of the things that I have in common, with the entrepreneurs who listen to your podcast, is I'm in my own business. And I didn't come from an entrepreneurial family. And sometimes I just have nobody to ask my dumb questions to. And so those two have always been there for me. So I'm grateful for them.
I can relate to that, not coming from an entrepreneurial family and just kind of feeling like it really never goes away, but kind of feeling like I'm new to this always, no matter how long you've been doing it.
Right.
Final question. So let's pretend we're at an awards banquet, much like the Oscars or the Emmys or Tonys. You're being awarded a lifetime achievement for everything you've done up until this point. What we all want to know is, who do you thank? So not just family, but who are the colleagues, who are the friends, who are the mentors, who are the peers, who are the partners, who are the fellow associates, who are the law school classmates, who are the people that you would acknowledge in your remarks?
So I guess because you didn't ask me this before, I know it's not supposed to be family, but it really, for me, it would be my family. I had great professors and I've had great friends in the legal industry and in the coaching and consulting industry. And, John and Carrie would definitely be on my list. But I have been so ridiculously fortunate, and talk about gratitude, to have parents who just everything I am is because of my parents, essentially. I mean, they pushed me, they supported me. And they've always been there, even now. It's like, I can't imagine, for people who have lost their parents, they'll understand this. I can't imagine a time when I wouldn't need or want my parents around, because they've always been so helpful to me. Also, I would have to say my husband. I mean, I totally won the husband jackpot. We've been married for 29 years now. We just celebrated 29 years. And again, really fortunate, just because I have a complete partner who, has this delusion that I'm capable of doing anything that I want to do. And he thinks I'm funny for some reason. So, all of that is really great. And those are the people that, would be on my mind if I were fortunate enough to get a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Excellent. The Lawyer's Edge, where can people go to learn more about you or to connect with you?
So you can go to my website, which is thelawyersedge.com. You can track me down on LinkedIn, Elise Holtzman. And you can sign up for my podcast. I would love to have you listen to the podcast where, I bring in lots of guests who have really fabulous things to say that are applicable to lawyers, but not, also applicable to other people, as you mentioned.
Absolutely. Go check it out on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, any of those different platforms, whatever you prefer. Go check it out. Elise, thanks so much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
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 And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.